You're listening to 89.7 WGBH HD1 Boston. Online at gbhnews.org. GBH News. What matters to you?
I'm Edgar III. Today on the Curiosity Desk, we're taking a break from our regularly scheduled programming for a special edition of the show we're calling Curiosity 2, Electric Boogaloo. A whole hour about energy, how we use it, how we store it, how we cultivate it. Of course, in the fine year 2026, you cannot ignore the data center question, but according to the experts we talk with, there's as big a story right under our noses, all the other things we use electricity for. Plus, we'll take you inside a nuclear fission facility at MIT. No radiation exposure for you to worry about, though our team did have a certain glowing green hue this week. And we'll explore the clean, utopian promise of nuclear fusion, not splitting atoms, but sticking them together. And stick with us for an electric hour ahead on the Curiosity Desk.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. Legendary stage, film, and television actor Tim Curry has died. The Los Angeles Police Department says officers responded to a call last night at the British actor's home in Los Angeles. Cause of death was not confirmed. Curry was known for a wide range of comedic, dramatic, and scary performances. Iconic roles included the evil clown Pennywise in Stephen King's It. But one of his most memorable is his portrayal of Dr. Frankenfurter in 1975's The Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Come up to the lab and see what's on the slab. I see you shiver with anticipation.
Curry starred as an extraterrestrial visitor who believed in fluid gender identities and sexual freedom. In a 2005 interview on Fresh Air with Terry Gross, Curry recalled how his character morphed since the 1973 London stage version, The Rocky Horror Show.
Originally, I played Frankenfurter as though he was German. He was Dr. Frankenfurter, and everything was very interesting and stupid. And then one day I heard a woman on a bus saying, "Do you have a house in town or a house in the country?" And I thought, yes, she should sound like the Queen.
Tim Curry was 80 years old. President Trump has confirmed that CIA Director John Ratcliffe recently traveled to Russia. Trump addressed recent news reports to that effect, but gave almost no details about the trip. More from NPR's Danielle Kurtzleben.
Speaking on the Glenn Beck program, Trump downplayed the significance of Ratcliffe's trip.
He's there, very sort of semi-routine. I hate to disappoint people. We would like to see the war with Ukraine end.
Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has said the meeting was strictly between security services and that Ratcliffe did not meet with President Vladimir Putin. Russia's war in Ukraine is now 4.5 years old. Before taking office, Trump repeatedly said he could end the war within one day. However, repeated White House attempts to help create a peace agreement have failed. Danielle Kurtzleben, NPR News.
The social media company Meta and the states suing it have agreed to a proposed settlement that would resolve a landmark federal child safety lawsuit, according to a statement from California Attorney General Rob Bonta. California, Colorado, Kentucky, and New Jersey represented a large consortium of states that allege that Meta designed its apps, Facebook and Instagram, to be addictive to kids, knew about the risks those platforms pose, but hid that information from the public. In court, Meta has denied the allegations. From Washington, this is NPR News.
Good afternoon. With the latest from the GBH newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro. The Stowe police officer accused of misusing law enforcement databases to track a woman he was in a relationship with has resigned from the department ahead of scheduled termination hearing. A release from the Stowe Mass Police Department says that Officer Jason Rogers has resigned from the department ahead of an employment status hearing that had been scheduled for today. That hearing has now been canceled. Rogers was placed on paid administrative leave on June 18th of this year, approximately 3 hours after the department received a complaint alleging that he had misused law enforcement databases, including a controversial flock safety camera that he needed to track someone he knew. A billionaire family from Houston, Texas, buying Boston's iconic Union Oyster House, the oldest restaurant in America. Several sources report the restaurant, which is a National Historic Landmark on Boston's Freedom Trail, was owned for over 50 years by Joe Milano, a brigadier general of the U.S. Army and also honorary consul to General to Thailand in Boston. According to the reports, the new owners are the Farida family, who say they'll continue to run the operation similar to how it's been run since its opening in the 19th century. Who are the Faridas, you ask? Well, the family's known for their ownership of the Houston Rockets. They have the Golden Nugget Hotel and Casinos. They also have Caesars Entertainment, and they also own the Rainforest Cafe and the Bubba Gump chains. They had previously owned the UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Well, they're in Boston now. This is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Fisher Investments. Fisher's dedicated team of specialists provide resources on investing, retirement income, estate planning, and more. Learn more at FisherInvestments.com. Investing in securities involves the risk of loss.
Welcome to the Curiosity Desk on GBH 89.7. I'm Edgar B. Herwick III. We are streaming live at youtube.com/GBH News. Well, we got a special edition of the Curiosity Desk today. We're calling it Curiosity 2 Electric Boogaloo. Yeah. Yeah, we're going to spend the hour talking about energy. What and who is using so much of it, what it costs in dollars and in impact, and what its future might look like. Of course, if we're talking about energy, we have to talk about data centers, the big energy hungry elephant in the room these days. Our question: exactly how much energy are these things using, and how might we here in Massachusetts learn from more mature markets like, say, Virginia or Texas? Here to help us with that is Rachel Mural, Research Associate at the Harvard Belfer Center's Environment and Natural Resources Program. Rachel, welcome to the Curiosity Desk.
Thanks for having me.
Well, data centers not polling very well right now in the United States of America, and there's lots of reasons for that, from water usage to just, I think, general, people's attitudes toward big tech right now. But two of the big issues that I think people have with data centers, two of the reasons why they're not polling well is the concerns about the electricity that's got to be generated for these things to operate and what that might mean for the environment. And then also whether they're going to stress the grid out and costs are going to go up for the average person when that happens. So let's baseline. Do we know how much energy these data centers are really using? Is it a lot?
Yeah, that is an excellent question, and it's one that I wish we had a solid answer to. The challenge right now is that data centers are coming online faster than the grid is able to really build out the infrastructure we need to support them. So the best estimates we have come from the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, which says that in 2023, data centers were using about 4.4% of U.S. electricity.
Total. Okay.
They recently came out with a revised report that's saying that by 2030, that could go up to 9.5 to 15.3%, which, aside from the fact that's a huge growth, is also a very wide range of possibilities. Part of the challenge here is there's really a lack of transparency in what the data centers are reporting themselves and in what local officials who are helping plan the data centers can really talk about.
When you say what the data centers are reporting themselves, this is future data centers? I mean, presumably we know how much energy a data center that's already operating is using, or we don't?
We don't. And that's part of the challenge. Yeah, so, and this is something that we look quite a lot about because we talk about transparency, thinking that utilities, leaders, people making these decisions have the full picture. And in some cases, they don't. I think a great example of this is PJM, which is the grid system that's serving Virginia. They are just starting to make a full database looking at how many data centers are in their region, how much are they consuming. But that's not a database that's previously existed.
Wow.
Yeah. And, when we talk about trying to estimate how much energy and electricity data centers are using, we're relying on a lot of assumptions. And some of those assumptions are what qualifies as a data center. Are we talking about crypto mines? Are we thinking about different kinds of servers, cooling systems, energy efficiency?
Right.
And all of those assumptions change that number.
You know, in your research, you've done deep dives into Texas and Virginia. Why Texas and Virginia?
Yeah, so Texas and Virginia are the two most mature markets in the United States for data centers.
Gotcha.
Virginia is the largest data center market in the world, and Texas is very, very close on its heels. So when we think about areas that are really farther along in this process, they've had a long time with data centers, and now they're really thinking about how do we legislate this moving forward.
So one of the distinctions, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is Virginia, like we are here, they're sort of part of a regional grid.
Yes.
Texas, which is very Texas kind of way to do things, they have their own grid. It is just like the Texas grid, right? Mm-hmm. So how does the fact that one is kind of operating its own grid and one is part of a regional grid, how does that, do we see different sort of behaviors? Do we see different results in these two markets?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the big difference is when you look at a grid like PJM, which is the grid system that Virginia is a part of, they have many, many different people that they have to answer to. They have the PJM system, they have many generators, utility operators, but then they also have, I believe, 13 states that have input and all the communities within that region. So when you think about trying to really move the needle on data center policy issues, there's a lot of people that have opinions, a lot of stakeholders, and a lot of stakeholders with very different incentives. On Texas, a little differently, they also have a very large market. The difference there is they're only working primarily with ERCOT. So they have more of an ability to move a bit faster because there are fewer stakeholders that have to be consulted.
Yeah. You listen to The Curiosity Desk. We're talking with Harvard researcher Rachel Mural about data centers, energy usage. This is our special energy hour. What have we learned? What have we learned? I mean, and when you, as somebody who I'm always interested. Somebody who researches a topic like this, which is really popping in the news, where you see a lot of people who have a lot of concerns. You have an understanding of this situation that is well beyond, I think, what the average person does. Like, are our fears founded? And what have we seen in Virginia and Texas? Like, have these things that people are worried about come to fruition?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think it's one that I personally sometimes do struggle with. Because I think on one hand, we have seen some warning signs flashing in different ways. I think a good example is even just this past month in Virginia, there was a simultaneous disconnection of 3 gigawatts of power because
how much is 3 gigawatts of power?
So it would be roughly amount to power over 2 million homes. So it's not an insubstantial amount.
Yeah.
And at the time, it was 3% of the total demand on the grid system.
Okay.
There was the disturbance on the grid. And because data centers rely so much on continuous uptime and just always being on power, they made the automated decision simultaneously to disconnect from the power grid. When that happens, you are more at risk of different sort of system faults and reliability problems. In this case, it was just lights flickering. They were able to stabilize.
Yeah.
But in a more severe case, it could lead to blackouts or real damage to the hardware. And I think, on the other side, when we think of Texas, one issue that I think is really coming to fruition right now is the interconnection queue. So, if you have a project that wants to get power from the grid, it has to go through the interconnection process to get that power from the grid operator. The grid operators then use that list to try to understand how much power demand might happen in the future. It seems like an easy system. It seems like a really helpful way to understand in 5 years, we need this much more generation. Yeah. The problem right now is that interconnection queue is 5 times the size of the peak demand in ERCOT.
Five times the peak demand.
5 times the peak demand. And a large part of that is because developers are doing what's called phantom interconnection requests.
What is that?
They're basically putting in multiple different applications for one project in different locations. And the idea there is they want their power as fast as possible.
Yeah.
So it helps them because they're able to see, okay, if this connection can't be done quickly, maybe this other one can. But it makes it really hard for the grid operator to know how much more power do I need? How much more transmission equipment do I need? And there's a really real risk of overbuilding. And those costs ultimately come to the end consumer. So going back to your question, I think that a lot of the challenges that we're seeing right now have been in the works for a long time. The thing that gives me hope is the fact that more and more people are really starting to think about them and talk about them.
Yeah. So, help it. I mean, people thinking about them and talking about them, I think is a good thing. However, what is the path forward, or what should we be thinking about as we think about the path forward? And especially, here in Massachusetts, as you say, we're not as mature of a market as Virginia or Texas, and we don't have, the data centers are not taking up, a huge portion of our grid here in New England vis-a-vis what it is in Virginia or in Texas. What ought we be thinking about locally here as, we look forward?
Yeah, no, and I think there's a lot to be learned both in Virginia and Texas, but then also just in the local communities across the country.
Yeah.
On the local level, a lot of what we're seeing are people realizing that some of the siting and zoning regulations weren't written with data centers in mind.
Yeah.
So the fact that people are now starting to look at those critically and really try to rewrite them so data centers can still develop, but not at the expense of communities and just the general welfare of society. And, I think on the larger policy issue, it's really helpful to look at places like Texas, where they passed Senate Bill 6 last year, because, seeing these larger bills that are coming forward, trying to think about cost sharing and transparency and the interconnection problem, those are going to be leading the way for states like Massachusetts as they consider if we want to grow a data center market, and if so, how.
You believe, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I guess I'll ask you, do you believe that, there is a way for us here in the United States or us here in New England to build data centers in a responsible way that is going to, allow us to tap into the promise of AI and also not destroy our electric grid? Way forward? There's a way to do it?
The short answer is yes.
But as challenging as it seems like it is, it sounds like.
Yeah. And, I think one thing just to flag is, the short answer is yes. But I think moving forward, there's just a huge requirement for more transparency on all sides. I think something I've kept coming back to when doing this work is the fact that this information is really challenging to get. And I say that as someone who, this is my job. I work on this,
Yeah.
And when I think about how challenging it is for researchers, utilities, local leaders to get this information to make responsible decisions, it really begs the question, how can we expect a local community to be able to make good choices about data centers coming in?
Well, how do we get more transparency? Is that something for our lawmakers?
I think at this point, yes. I think, it's been interesting to watch the ratepayer pledge pan out a bit more, because I do think there's an opportunity with that for more transparency to be integrated into the legislative process when they think about how should we be, making data center policy. The question there is just whether it happens. I think one challenge in watching this landscape right now is the fact that we're in a midterm election season where many candidates are coming out with very big promises about what they want to do with data centers. The question is whether those promises are just campaign slogans or whether we're going to see a real movement after the election is done.
Okay. We've been speaking with Rachel Mural. She's a research associate at the Harvard Kennedy School Belfer Center's Environment and Natural Resources Program. Rachel, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
When we return, we consider the energy-scape of Massachusetts and how we might adapt to rising needs and rising costs. This is the Curiosity Desk. I'm Edgar B. Herwick III. It's an energy special. Stay connected.
I'm Jared Bowen. Today on The Culture Show, the corset. It shaped women's bodies, restricted their movement, and dictated how they dressed. But in Worcester, the business of making corsets gave thousands of women something the garment itself did not: freedom. To earn a living, patent designs, and even build companies of their own. Anne-Marie Murphy joins us with A Proper Fit, her new book about the women who built an industry around confinement and found opportunity inside it. That and more on The Culture Show today at 2 on GBH 89.7.
Support for our programs comes from you.
And the Art Complex Museum in Duxbury, presenting Scenes of the Sea through September 6th, and the Outdoor Sculpture Exhibit Under Construction, America at 250 through August 2027. All exhibits open to the public. artcomplex.org. And Cambridge Savings Bank, where they are committed to your financial well-being, and community is at the core of everything they do. Cambridge Savings Bank. Always you. More at cambridgesavings.com, member FDIC.
listening to the Curiosity Desk on GBH 89.7. I'm Edgar B. Herwick III. We're streaming live at youtube.com/GBH News. Well, as we were just talking about, on a national level, data centers are a huge energy suck. When we look at places like Texas and Virginia, we can see clear as day how their electric grids are struggling to keep up with current loads. Locally, we're relatively young in data center years. As we talked about, we haven't built out nearly as much as other places. In Massachusetts, the largest loads on the grid are actually heating and cooling and EVs. And with a 9% energy demand increase forecasted over the next decade, according to ISO New England, are there things we can and should do to keep up with demand and keep costs to consumers under control? We're joined now by Christopher Knittel, Professor of Applied Economics and Associate Dean for Climate and Sustainability at MIT, and Barbara Kates-Garnick, Professor of Practice in Energy Policy at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. Welcome to you both. Thanks for being with us here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So it seems to me, I mean, I'm obviously not an electricity expert, but I'm going to guess if you have an increase in demand for for power for electricity, there's sort of two things you can do. You can either produce more, or you can more efficiently use what you are producing. And my understanding, Chris, is what you work on is a little bit like, can we be more efficient with the energy we have? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. We can be more efficient in several ways. We could use more efficient appliances. We can change when we're consuming electricity. So there's a lot of levers that we can pull that would keep costs down while at the same time growing demand.
So you work on this thing called power flexibility. What is power flexibility? I want to talk about power flexibility. What is that?
Yeah, so flexibility is the second thing I mentioned, which is, I have a choice as to when I run my dishwasher, when I run my clothes dryer, when I charge my car. So flexibility in the grid is moving your use of that electricity from a peak period to an off-peak period.
Is the power flexibility sort of thing, is that something that can mitigate concerns around the data center issue? Is there a way for data centers to be flexible?
So we actually have a recent publication out in the last 2 months on this very topic. So if data centers can be flexible with their computation, then that can keep costs down at a wholesale level. And in theory, at least, more data centers can actually lower retail rates. That sounds counterintuitive, but it's at least feasible.
Okay. How does that? How would that work?
Well, I'm not a data center expert, but in traditional perception of energy and electricity, when and how you use your consumption is really critical. And if you can reduce your load at various times of day, technically you won't have to ramp up the most expensive generation, which then comes in when load and consumption increases. So theoretically, the data centers, if they have batteries, if they have on-site generation, if they have solar and renewables, in addition to the ability to, I'm going to say, calibrate their use. In theory, it should happen. I think we're very much at an early stage in many of these questions. And how and when a data center responding to, a computation, a mega computation is able to do it becomes an unknown for us at this point. But in theory, as Professor Knittel said, it should work. So I think that we're at an early stage, and if I were the public and I didn't understand energy generation, energy use, I saw these massive consumers coming into my area, I would have concerns about how this is going to happen. So this is the moment that we're at this time.
As we said, right now here in Massachusetts, while despite the fact that data centers and their sort of usage of energy, their theoretical stress on the grid, that's taking up a lot of attention, but it's also sort of throwing a light on just the general grid and where it's at and our infrastructure around that, our energy usage. As we were just saying, here in Massachusetts, the two biggest sort of stresses, for lack of a better word, on the grid are heating and cooling And electric vehicles, which surprises me, that electric vehicles are that big of an energy consumer here in the state. How does this sort of flexibility issue, how can that relate to these kinds of industries or this kind of usage?
Well, to even take a step backwards, we've long realized that we have an aging infrastructure. We have an aging grid.
Yeah.
And as we began to think about how we integrate renewables into the grid, we began to realize that we needed large-scale transmission. And now with data centers, we realize that this need is even greater. Now,
what is large-scale transmission versus any other kind of transmission of electricity?
I'll turn it over to the
Well,
engineer.
it depends on the voltage, but think large power lines that are going hundreds of miles and bringing electrons from
taking
far
more electricity
distances.
from point A to point B than would be needed to, say, plug something in your outlet in your house.
Exactly. So there are these very large lines that are powered by HDVC, which is high density transmission lines, very large transmission lines that, cross the landscape. I think that we're coming into an age when we have to change and think about creating these high, long-scale transmission lines across the grid. To do this is a technology change. Technology change is expensive. And ultimately, the question for the consumer and the consumer in Massachusetts is who pays. So energy efficiency is great, but how you pay, when you pay, and whether the data centers which have committed to pay for whatever they cost to be built actually do pay, because of the way we regulate electricity, opens a lot of questions and doors. So that's an answer to your question with a lot of uncertainty.
You're listening to The Curiosity Desk. We're talking with Christopher Knittel and Barbara Kates-Garnick about addressing challenges to our energy supply. Barbara, you just mentioned that as we were bringing renewables onto the grid, this was one of the things that kind of led us to understand, in your words, that we needed this sort of, the kind of the larger power lines, et cetera. What was it about the renewables piece, and what is the renewable energy sort of piece in all of this equation? As I was saying, we can use our current sort of energy more efficiently, but we could also make more. People have a lot of concerns about burning more fossil fuels. Renewables have the promise to be, better for the environment. What was it about renewables?
Well, renewables are very interesting because renewables are raise questions about reliability. There are times that the sun doesn't shine, the wind doesn't blow. So in that situation, you're going to need a lot of backup. You're going to need ways to back up the renewables onto the grid. Where they enter the grid becomes very important as well. So as we begin to go to more renewable generation and where we begin to plug it into the grid and so that it's useful for the grid and can be transmitted, this raised the knowledge that we needed to improve our grid. So we've been facing this question for a long time. We just haven't wanted to take the appropriate steps because it's expensive and painful to do it. And now data centers are forcing the issue once more.
I think with the other thing with renewables is they tend not to be where the people live, right? So the best places for wind are in the Midwest.
Right.
The best places for solar are not necessarily in the population centers. So as we build out renewables, that forces us to bring electrons from further distances to the population centers, and that's where transmission comes in.
Got it. Obviously, you lay this stuff out, and it, one of the chief things standing in the way is the cost. Who's going to pay for it, as you mentioned. But are there other challenges besides the cost? Like if we just somehow came up with the money, is this solvable like in an instant?
Well, let's take a couple of the demand increasers in turn. So for data centers, I think one of the biggest challenges is actually connecting them to the grid. In many locations, it takes upwards of 3 years for that data center to connect to the grid. So what they're doing in replacement of that is building their own generation. That generation that they're building tends to be dirtier, less efficient. So that's another problem.
Yeah.
With, say, heat pumps or electric vehicles, if we do it wrongly, we'll grow the peak electricity consumption, and that will bring in a lot more costs to make that transition.
But underlying is a really important issue, which is what are the regulatory processes in place, both at the federal level and at the state level, to enable these activities to happen in a way that is fair to the customer, that is fair to the consumer, and that's why you're seeing politicians now. All of a sudden, those that saw data centers as bringing tax revenue to the local economy, now they're realizing that the cost of these data centers may be greater than the benefits that they're bringing to the local community. So while we can talk about energy, and this is something that's really important to understand, these data centers are embodying sort of a lot more questions on how we regulate electricity at the local and the state level. And the other thing is there's the independent system operators, which control the reliability of the grid and also the operation of the grid. So though these are very wonky issues and economists and engineers love to spend time talking about them, that's what the public needs to better understand, and we've done a very poor job in informing the public on how all this works.
So how do we inform the public? I mean, that's kind of what we're trying to do here. How do we inform the public better? I mean, because the thing is like this problem is not going away. Like you can't close your eyes and be like, this will get figured out. Like this is here.
Yeah, it's definitely here. I think in Massachusetts, one thing we have going for us, at least in the short run, is we're starting to install a lot of smart meters.
Yeah.
So that's bringing in a new technology that we can.
And how does that help? Just gives us a better understanding of the, at a very small level, how energy is being used, or
no. So the great thing about these meters are that we could start to price electricity depending on what time of day you're consuming it. So
dynamic pricing.
That would incentivize shifting from peak periods to off-peak periods.
So this is one of the levers you would have to say, like, okay, like this is how we're going to manage behavior, like in terms of like spreading out when we're using this.
That's right, which has not been available to the Commonwealth.
Right,
Yeah.
so we don't have time of use rates in the same way that once you have these smart meters in place, you'll be able as a customer to look at your energy use and calibrate your behavior. Now, whether I'm going to do my laundry at 2 a.m.
I was going to say, you're going to have the sleep doctors coming
I
after
don't
you.
know.
Like,
I'm not doing it at 2 in the morning.
Doing stuff at night, yeah.
Right. Whether I'm going to run my washing machine. I think it really means the large consumers who already do get price signals and make certain decisions based on the cost of the energy for their production processes. But again, we've hit on so many different topics that it's really hard to find one answer to the problems that we're discussing.
And technology can unlock a lot of flexibility.
Yeah.
So maybe I won't turn my washing machine on at 2 a.m, but my washing machine might turn itself on at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
And right now, there's no incentive for me to
Well, big tech would say
provide
we
that
need the data
flexibility.
centers to be able to, we
That's right.
need to have the data centers be able to give you the power to do that. All right. Before I let you go, I mean, if you two know this stuff inside and out in a way that most people don't, if you had ultimate power, if you could sort of like wave your hand and do one or two things right now, what are one or two things you would change about the way we're doing things now to move us in the right direction, Barbara?
So I would actually try to change the regulatory processes.
Okay.
These processes are very arcane. They happen at a state level, and people really don't understand what decisions are being made. So I would try to open up more transparent decision making so that we could bring customers and consumers along and understand the choices that need to be made on a policy level over a period of time.
Christopher.
So I would start with what we were just talking about, which is the rate structure. So
Yeah.
I recently wrote a paper, Smart Meters, Dumb Prices. We have the technology to send the right signals and to incentivize customers to change their demand profile to lower prices, and we're not using that technology.
Well, you're making change right here. Zach on YouTube commented, I never would have considered that the timing of our energy use might affect the price. Important for us to get streamlined as data centers and EVs place more stress on the grid. So well done. Thank you both for being with us. We've been speaking with Christopher Knittel and Barbara Kates-Garnick from Tufts. Again, thank you both for being with us.
Thank you.
When we return, we're headed straight into the core of the matter. the nuclear core. This is the Curiosity Desk on GBH. It's our energy special. Don't go anywhere.
Learn something new.
I want to start with how crowds of people can act like fluids.
Yes.
What?
I mean, this is physics, so I love it.
Make a connection.
I have no idea who they voted for. I don't care. This tailgate in particular, everybody's welcome.
Dig a bit deeper.
We're often looking for a small secular liturgy for our lives, and poetry can provide that sometimes.
Stay curious with All Things Considered from NPR News.
This afternoon at 4 on GBH 89.7.
Support for GBH comes from you.
And Cornerstone at Canton, an assisted living community with wellness, care, and support services designed to help seniors age in place, including a Compass Memory Support Neighborhood. CornerstoneCanton.com. And Revision Energy, a renewable energy company building and servicing solar, batteries, and air source heat pumps for local homes and businesses for over 20 years. Revision Energy. Revision your power. More at revisionenergy.com.
You're listening to the Curiosity Desk on GBH 89.7. I am Edgar B. Herwick III, and we together are streaming live at youtube.com/GBH News. Well, in a single radio hour, we're obviously not going to generate a solution to our energy quandary, but what we can do is unpack some of the things we could do to move closer to a solution. One option that we think is worth understanding a little bit better is nuclear power. Now, right now, we get nuclear power from splitting atoms. This is called nuclear fission. We've learned to do it reliably and at scale, though not without risks and concerns, from accidents to the sticky wicket of what do you do with the nuclear waste produced by the process. Nuclear fusion is the opposite. It involves bringing atomic nuclei together. That's still on the horizon, though we are getting closer. We'll talk more in depth about the potential for fusion in a moment, but for now, a closer look at how nuclear fission works on location at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology with some experts in the field.
Hi, I'm Gordon Kohse. I'm the Managing Director for Operations here at the MIT Nuclear Reactor Lab.
Of course, first we had to ask, what even is nuclear fission?
Nuclear fission, it happens when a neutron is absorbed by a few particular isotopes. The one that's mostly used for nuclear power is uranium-235. The reason that we get a lot of energy from fission is that there's a mass difference between so when the neutron is absorbed by U-235 splits into two pieces. The pieces weigh less than the original atom, and that difference in mass gets converted to energy.
Now, if you're a little lost, I think it's kind of like this. A neutron slams into U-235, which absorbs it and becomes unstable, like an overfilled water balloon, until it pops into smaller little pieces. Now, when you weigh those two smaller atoms afterward, they're lighter than the original atom. That missing mass doesn't just disappear, though. That turns into energy.
So I think everybody knows Einstein's famous formula, even if they don't know what it means, E equals mc squared. But so the E is energy, m is mass, c squared is the speed of light. So if you calculate then that mass, the energy is the mass change times the speed of light squared, and it turns out that that's really a lot of energy.
So, I mean, if we're at the reactor lab, we should go inside, right?
So they've opened the inner door. So this is an airlock, so we can't have both doors open at once. So they opened the inner door, now they're coming through to open this roof for us.
After making it through a futuristic spaceship-looking door, you find a huge warehouse. Picture thick concrete walls, the low hum of ventilation, and signs everywhere warning against radiation exposure. We walked through and eventually got to the top, where the magic happens.
So you can see a yellow cylinder in front of us here, which is about 8 feet in diameter, and that's the outside shielding of the reactor core tank. So inside that, there is an aluminum tank, which is what actually contains the reactor core and the light water that we talked about that circulates around to cool the core. And then
inside that reactor, that fission process we were just talking about, it's happening. Now, MIT isn't looking to generate electricity like a power plant. They're using their machine for research purposes. And, of course, if something goes wrong, you'll hear this sound. Now, if that does happen, control operators do what's called a scram. They take these long metal plate-like things and drop them into the reactor to immediately stop operations. No emergencies happened on our tour, thankfully. That was just a demo. But just to be safe, on our way out of the reactor, we had to do a radiation check.
Fairly modern and pretty automated, so all you're going to do is step on the foot pads, try to keep your feet in the middle. You can see these little things are the light sensors that tell it your foot is there, and then you're going to push your hands all the way to the back. These things will move so that if you have a watch or something on it, there'll be room for it. So you just climb on there, hands in, and then it will count down. 4, 3, 2, 1, 2. Thank you. Please exit.
Once we were certified radiation-free and we left the reactor, we began to think about nuclear waste. In the United States, once old fuel leaves the reactor, it spends years underwater to cool down. Only then does it move into a dry cask, as we learned from UMass Lowell's Sukesh Agara.
They're kind of stored above ground in these dry casks that are made out of concrete, high-density nuclear-grade concrete with stainless steel cylinders. And now these dry casks have demonstrated performance over 20 years of meeting the safety standards. These dry casks are designed for about 120 years of engineering life. And so, you've got another 100 years of good use life on that. And there are other monitoring systems that are required in order to ensure that the spent fuel is staying where it is.
But a dry cask is not sufficient to store nuclear waste forever. Currently, the United States does not have a final resting place after that 120-year lifespan is up. Scientists are searching for answers now, as some dry casks are approaching the age of 80. So, when the waste stays radioactive for thousands of years, far longer than the plant itself will ever operate, we had to ask, why nuclear?
If you wanted to sort of simply visualize, right, 1 gram of uranium when it's fissioned will be equivalent of a ton, so a truck full of coal. So basically the differentials are in the millions. So the amount of energy per unit mass, and this goes for fusion as well. So any form of a nuclear reaction, fission or fusion, tends to have a substantially higher amount of energy released per unit mass compared to anything that relies on chemical reaction.
A few more numbers for you. According to the Department of Energy, nuclear produces 3 times as much energy per year than wind farms of comparable size. The trade-off, besides the nuclear waste, is that nuclear plants are more expensive to build and take a long time to get approval due to the strictly regulated safety guidelines set forth by the NRC. So what's next for nuclear energy? Well, scientists are researching the possibility of small modular reactors. We're not rolling them out just yet, but Gordon Kohse from the MIT Nuclear Reactor Lab discussed the potential benefits they could bring.
One of the big problems with reactors is with our current generation reactors that make usually about 1,000 megawatts of electric power per reactor. But they're very expensive. They cost billions of dollars, and so there's a lot of money invested in that period between when you start building the reactor and when you can make power and start getting some of that money back. So it would be easier to build smaller reactors economically, and also the idea is that with small reactors you can make most of the parts in a factory and then basically just ship the whole reactor to where you want to use it, which should be cheaper and more reliable than having to build and construct and assemble everything on the site.
And here's what Kohse had to say for the fission and fusion conversation.
For me, right now, we have a crisis with climate change. And so for me, right now, we need to develop everything that we possibly can. Fission is the one that we know works, and we know how to build. In 50 years, if we could be replacing a lot of fission power with fusion power, I think that would be a very good goal to aim towards.
Story was produced by Olivia Corcio and edited by Rachel Armani.
Well, now we go from fission to fusion, which, like it sounds, involves joining two atomic nuclei together to produce energy. And scientists say it could produce a lot of energy if we're able to harness its power. Now, if you're in the know on the topic of fusion, you've likely heard for years and years that we are just on the cusp of figuring it out. But there is reason to believe that we are right now, actually getting close to figuring it out. Here in Massachusetts, there's a local connection that's made international headlines on that front recently. Dennis White, co-founder of the massively influential $4 billion Commonwealth Fusion Systems right here in Devons. It's one of those companies trying to make breakthroughs in this space. He's been appointed to lead the UK Atomic Energy Authority. Here's some sound of him from a coming documentary about nuclear fusion energy.
Well, the joke is that, fusion is 30 years away and will always be 30 years away. I want to eliminate that joke from the English language.
Well, that's the kind of drive that might make Dennis the guy to figure it out. And we ask, is he the guy to figure it out? And why has it taken us so long to crack this case? Well, here to help us get our heads around nuclear fusion is someone who's been knee-deep in the fusion energy world for years. She's behind that documentary we just mentioned. It's NOVA senior producer Caitlin Sachs. Caitlin, thanks so much for being with us here.
So excited to be here.
All right, what is fusion?
Yeah, we got to back up a second, don't we?
Let's go. What is it?
Okay, so fusion is the same kind of energy that powers the sun.
Okay.
So what is happening there? So when you take two light elements, so let's say most fusion reactors, most fusion systems are using isotopes of hydrogen.
Okay.
So an isotope is just, one proton in the nucleus, but different numbers of neutrons. And you try to get those close together. They want to repel, right? Because they're positively charged. But if you can overcome that repulsion, there's this barrier there. They call it the Coulomb barrier.
I think about when I have two magnets that are both the same charge, right?
Yeah.
And you sort of feel them pushing away from each other. It's just that, but you really got to push.
So yes, you have to get past that barrier. And if you do, then the nuclei of those join, and that releases a lot of energy. So it's kind of the exact opposite process of fission, which we just heard about. Fission breaks them apart, breaks apart heavy elements, and fusion merges them together. And that's what powers the sun. It's fusing light elements into heavier elements, letting off a lot of energy, and that is why we feel heat on our back when we're outside in late August.
What is it about this process of fusion that is so tantalizing and people are so excited about? It's just, does it produce more power? What?
So it produces a lot of power compared to other forms of energy.
Okay.
But also there's a few different things. First of all, it's clean energy. So you're not clean energy. Yep. So you're not emitting carbon dioxide. So climate change, we're trying to get off carbon dioxide, so it's appealing for that reason.
Check.
Second, the fuel itself is virtually limitless. I mean, if you do the calculations, it's something like the expected life expectancy of the Earth, or something like that.
We got a lot of it.
We've got a lot of it because it's hydrogen. It's hydrogen.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
It takes most forms use a heavy form of hydrogen called deuterium, and then an even heavier form of hydrogen called tritium, which we have to create. Deuterium's natural, tritium we have to create it for the reactions, but basically it's virtually limitless. And so when you think about that, then you're thinking about a form of energy that does not matter, what kind of reserves are under the ground, or when the wind is blowing, when the sun,
and presumably easier to get. Like we don't have to mine it the way we mine coal, or we do.
I mean,
some of it.
We have to develop, particularly for tritium, we have to develop the processes to create it. But the promise is there. And then the third, compared to fission, is it is relatively safer. With fusion reactions, the challenge, and we can talk more about how they're trying to create these, but the challenge is actually to keep it going. So this risk of a meltdown, like we saw at Fukushima or Chernobyl, you don't have that. There are some other more minor risks that we could talk about, but in general, the big meltdown fear isn't there. So plentiful, clean, and relatively safe.
So why is it, and I've certainly heard this before, but we just heard that quote from that quote from Dennis White.
He's great.
Why is it that it has forever sort of been like 15 years away? Like, first of all, do we know, can it be done?
It can definitely be done.
We know it can be done.
So we know it can be done for a few reasons. Back in 2022, we actually did it. The National Ignition Facility, this is based in Livermore, California, was actually, sorry, let me back up.
Go ahead.
We've been fusing elements together for decades. We can actually get them to fuse together. That's not the challenge.
Got it.
The challenge is actually doing it in a way where we're getting more energy out of the reaction than we're putting in.
Got it. So we're getting more energy out than we put in to make them fuse.
And the reason is we have to put a lot of energy in is we have to get the reaction we have to get the system to the right conditions for a lot of these atoms to start fusing.
Got it.
Ions to start fusing. And to do that, there's kind of three levers you can pull. You can make the temperature, the pressure, and how long you're kind of holding this for.
Time.
But it has to be very, very hot. So you're dealing with plasmas.
Yeah.
Plasma is like the fourth state of matter.
Right.
If you heat water up, or ice up, it turns into water. Heat water up, it turns into gas. You heat gas up, it turns into plasma. Plasma is like the electrons get ripped off, and it's this ionized gas that's hard to control. And we as humans don't have very much experience with it because we're used to the other three states of matter.
Yeah.
But that's what the sun is made of. That's what lightning is made of. That is what I think something like 99% of the universe is made of. But we have to kind of try to contain it here.
Yeah.
And so we have to get conditions that are like sun-like conditions, super hot pressure and confinement time with this plasma. And that is the challenge. How do we get those conditions? Now, a few years ago, in 2022, the National Ignition Facility actually managed to get more energy out than in. They basically took the world's most powerful lasers and focused them on this tiny little pellet of fuel.
It's crazy, yeah.
And bombarded it with that, and that created this reaction that made it kind of implode, and they got more energy out than in. And this was huge news. It was on
true breakthrough.
True breakthrough.
Yeah.
Everybody I've spoken to on the film, everyone I've spoken to on the film,
energized by it,
sees this as a gigantic breakthrough, a huge win for the science, because it has demonstrated that we can do
it's possible,
this. It's possible. The problem with that, or I shouldn't say problem, but with that method, there isn't an immediate way to turn that into energy on the grid. So even though more energy was delivered to the reaction than less energy was delivered to the reaction than they got out of it. So they got more energy out.
They weren't able to capture it, or we don't know how to capture it and use it.
Yeah. And they pulled a lot more energy off the grid. So the exact amount of energy delivered to that pellet in the middle was less than the amount of energy they used to power their lasers and all that stuff. They also do they fire about one or two of those a day. Oh. And they need to do maybe something like 10 a second.
Yeah.
So converting that into something that is commercially viable is something that folks are working on. But some in the industry feel like there's a longer path there, and there are other methods which might get there first. So there's this big competition on now. There's a whole bunch of private companies that have entered the race to try to figure out, not just to be the first to get to commercially viable meaning we could actually sell it, but to figure out which method of trying to contain this plasma will work. So the sort of field is wide open to what method will work. It might be more than one.
You're listening to Curiositas. We're talking with Nova senior producer Caitlin Sachs about nuclear fusion. So is it simply the fact that a couple years ago, like, there was this breakthrough that was demonstrated, or is it the amount of money being put in it right now and these potentially viable methods that have people saying that we finally maybe have turned a corner and we are closer than 15 years out from this? Like, why are people so excited right now?
I think there's a few different things happening. I think the urgency with climate change has helped fuel interest in it. We are just now getting to the point that private investors are starting to see it as potentially profitable. So we are transitioning in the last maybe 10 or so years from fusion being the realm of big government labs or research institutions to privately funded private companies with private capital, which changes the speed at which you can move. So, for example, you mentioned Commonwealth Fusion Systems. They just raised their $4 billion just this past summer. Right. So there's a lot of money going into this now. And the reason that is happening, of course, that's following what I think are some improvements in technology and science. Yeah. So they had been making some pretty decent incremental progress in particularly with tokamaks over the last several decades. And of course, until you get to the finish line, you're not hearing about the progress, right? But they've been getting closer to that break-even point. And in the case of Commonwealth Fusion Systems, they have a new technology called high-temperature superconductors, which are just becoming. Commonwealth actually helped build a supply chain for this. It's such a new technology, but that basically allows them to create much stronger magnets. Yeah. And magnets help contain that plasma. We can talk a bit more about why that is if you want, but the technology is just getting to the point. AI is another big one. AI and computer, and before AI, computer power for modeling how these crazy plasmas behave and trying to predict them, and trying to understand how they work so that they can iterate more quickly. Yeah.
We got about a minute left. I wonder if you could, talk about, just how much, if this is something that we are able to figure out, just how much it would change the game in terms of how we make energy here on this planet. What will it mean if we really if we figure this out?
I think you should talk to Dennis White about that. I think it could totally change how we get power. And what's super cool here for our Boston, our Massachusetts audience is like we might be inventing the future right here in Massachusetts if Commonwealth turns out to be.
When you say the future, you're talking about this will be our single source of energy, kind of.
I don't know.
Possibly.
I hesitate to say it'll be single source because you always need certain kinds of energy for different kinds of things. For example, you're not going to have a fusion machine in your car, right? At least not anytime soon. But it also opens the doors. There could be potential uses in space travel. It's kind of the limit. Read a science fiction novel, just think about where we could go there. So yeah.
Do you think we're close, given what you know?
I definitely think we're getting closer. The companies that we're profiling all think that basically in the 2030s they will get there, and then I think a little bit more time to establish themselves. I can't really say if it will be the 2030s or not. I'm hopeful. I hope so. Yeah. I'm not qualified enough to judge, but I do think we'll get there because the sheer amount of brain power and now
being
money
put on it,
and the imperative.
All right, that's Nova senior producer Caitlin Sachs. Caitlin, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
That about does it for us for now. Curiosity Desk is produced by Aidan Connolly, Rachel Armani, Olivia Corcio, and Hannah Loss. Our intern is Mukta Dharma Purkar, who leaves us today. Mukta, we are going to miss you so much. Thank you for everything you've done, and good luck with everything you're going to do. Patty Daniels and Jamie Bologna are the glowing nuclear core at the center of our operation. Our engineers, Bill Piacitelli. We'll be right back in 23 short hours. If you can't wait that long, we've got a podcast version of the show. You can check that out. Till next time, I'm Edgar B. Herwick III. Stay curious out there.
Great Scott! What's trending? What's interesting? What's going on around town? We're talking all things arts and culture on The Culture Show. Next on GBH 89.7.
Funding for our programs comes from you and members of the GBH Champions and Beacon Circles. These most generous annual contributors lead the way in sustaining GBH as a public media resource available and free to all. Learn more at gbh.org/support.
Miles O'Brien travels the globe searching for solutions to urgent climate, water, and health crises. Don't miss Resolve to Solve with Miles O'Brien tonight at 10 on GBH2.
You're listening to 89.7 WGBH HD1 Boston. Online at gbhnews.org. GBH News. What matters to you?
I'm Jared Bowen. Coming up on The Culture Show, remembering Dolly Parton. The singer, songwriter, and storyteller who could make jealousy, hardship, and ambition feel vivid, funny, and deeply human, died yesterday at 80. Grammy-winning singer-songwriter Paula Cole, a longtime admirer who recorded her song Heart Door with Parton, joins us to reflect on the craft, character, and enormous reach of the one and only music icon. From there, the extraordinary story behind Conversations with an Executioner. Polish resistance fighter Kazimierz Moczarski spent 255 days imprisoned with Jürgen Stroop, the Nazi officer responsible for the killing and deportation of tens of thousands of Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto, and a man Moczarski had once helped plot to assassinate. Now, for the first time, those prison conversations are available in full English. Translator Sean Gasper-By joins us. And we wrap things up in Worcester, once a corset capital. The city built an industry around a garment designed to confine and constrict women. Yet that same industry helped liberate women in the workforce, giving them wages, careers, and opportunities to design, invent, and run companies of their own. In the book A Proper Fit, Anne-Marie Murphy unpacks that contradiction and considers why, more than a century later, the corset still has such a grip on fashion and the imagination. That's all right now on The Culture Show.
The Culture Show is made possible in part by a generous contribution from the Fiducia Fund, proud to support this station's art and culture programming.
I'm Jared Bowen, coming to you from our studio at the Boston Public Library, live on 89.7 and streaming on the GBH News YouTube channel. This is The Culture Show, and this is the song Heart Door.
You ended us with that person who comes home too late from the bar.
We're listening to Dolly Parton and Paula Cole. Cole wrote Heart Door and recorded it with Parton more than 25 years ago, one of those jewels of a moment when admiration becomes collaboration. Paula Cole will join me in a moment to talk more about recording that duet and the icon's enduring artistic legacy. All of this, of course, as audiences continue to process the loss of Dolly Parton, who died yesterday at 80. She leaves behind an astonishing body of work, especially in song. She could write about poverty without nostalgia, about desire without apology, and about heartbreak without self-pity. She did it all with a clarity that made her songs feel immediate even decades later. I sat down with Dolly Parton in 2019 for a conversation largely focused on her songwriting. I asked her about how, as a young girl, she came to understand her talent. Do you remember the first time, going back to when you were 7, as you just mentioned, did you feel like something cracked open for you when you understood that you had this ability?
Well, actually, I wrote my first song when I was 5. Before I could write or even knew, my mama kept it. It was about a little cob doll, but I learned to play guitar. I started playing guitar when I was 7. And so after I learned those chords on the guitar, I would hear everybody sing and talk about stories about the war, talking about things that happened. Mama used to sing all those old songs from the old world brought over, from England and Ireland and Scotland, all those great old songs like Banks of the Ohio and Knoxville Girl.
Go there, you Knoxville girl with dark and rolling eyes.
I would just kind of remember all that and then tag stuff to what we were living. So I was able to rhyme stuff, so I would just write about our life and my life and the things I saw around me and would just create stuff, and it was a joy for me.
Well, Paula Cole has also understood that joy. The Massachusetts-born Grammy winner built her own career on emotionally direct and musically adventurous songwriting. Her new archival collection, Sonic Memoir Demos, 1989 to 1998, is out September 10th, and on September 18th, she performs her album This Fire in full for its 30th anniversary in a concert at the Wilbur Theater. Paula Cole joins us now to remember Dolly Parton. Welcome back to The Culture Show. Thank you so much for being here, Paula.
Hi, Jared. Thank you for having me on.
Well, I think we're all, I have to say, it's just almost unbelievable. It's so unbelievable when somebody has this much life, this much presence, these many contributions to our world is gone. What is your immediate reaction as you also process this news?
Oh, I mean, hearing her voice just now, I'm holding back my tears. And I've been pretty blue since I heard the news yesterday. I mean, she's like Glinda the Good Witch in our Oz, and she's the divine feminine incarnate. She's kindness and humor and rebelliousness without people even seeing it, and wit and warmth and wisdom and authenticity, even with the procedures. Like, she crossed boundaries from country radio to pop and, from radio to film to Broadway. I have real grief. And she was also some kind of, I think some kind of motherly figure for me. I love her dearly. And, I'm here in my studio at home, and the only portrait of an artist I have on the walls is of Dolly, and she lives above my piano. So I hope her death was peaceful and quick, and I send my love to her family. And I just miss her so much. And yeah, I'm grieving like everybody else. Her contribution is staggering. It's just gorgeous. She is goodness.
Well, before we explore that some more, I'd love to know about your collaboration with her, as we just heard in the song Heart Door, and how that came to be that you two had this duet.
Yeah.
I'm so envious.
Oh, God. What a wonderful day of my life. So I've been a lifelong fan since my father was playing her music. And it was like a dream, for me to do something with Dolly. And I wrote Heart Door with her in mind to sing the high part. And it was a quiet time in her career. It was before her The Grass is Blue album came out, and she returned to her bluegrass roots. So it was March of 1999. I went down to Nashville, and she joined me in the studio. She brought her two grandnieces. And they, so I met her family. And then the tape machine, which of course was real analog 2-inch tape, the tape machine broke down, which was fantastic for me because it meant we had to wait for maintenance and the engineer to come. And I got to spend the whole day hanging out with Dolly. Like, literally, we were kind of like lying down on the floor in a dark, like, little side room, one of the ISO booths, the isolation booths. And just learning about her and sharing. And it was hard for me at that time in my life. And she was encouraging and helped me kind of understand that it's okay to make mistakes. I was making mistakes right and left. And she was motherly, guiding, inspirational, giving. So she thought I was from Europe, being from New England. Oh.
And how did she come, when she came into the studio and as you guys were singing and recording, how did you see the artistic integrity she brought to that room being a performer?
Oh, I mean, so gosh, I mean, if that was 20 something years ago, so her voice, was already different, but she was hitting the high notes so beautifully. We didn't have auto-tune in those days. We easily did a comp with a few takes that she did. She has such an incredible ear. Like, she immediately found the harmonies. She wanted to please. She wanted to do a great job. She cared about giving a great musical performance. She cared about people. She was the funniest and the smartest person in the room. That's the thing. Like, she has it above everybody. Like, cracking up everybody in the room. And I didn't use that song on the Amen album when it came out. I think she was disappointed about that. And looking back on it, I'm really angry at myself for not doing it. But it came out later in a movie called Sweet November with Charlize Theron and Keanu Reeves. So it's in the soundtrack. And people who are real fans, they find Heart Door. And it's so beautiful what she did. It's just so beautiful.
Well, speaking of beautiful, I want to go back to the conversation I had with her as we begin to really understand and appreciate even more her songwriting, which, of course, you are a very acclaimed songwriter yourself. So before I ask you about what you saw and what she's done, here's Dolly Parton discussing the feeling of knowing if a song will resonate with audiences, especially with iconic tracks that have echoed through the years, including I Will Always Love You and Jolene. You've talked a lot about fun, but how do you know when you have a lyric that you really have hit it, that something's so poignant?
Well, you don't really know. If everybody knew what made a hit record, we'd all be rich and famous, wouldn't we? Every singer, writer. But there are times when you write songs and you really feel like that you really wrote something good. For instance, like I Will Always Love You, when I wrote that song, it came from my heart, but I also knew that was a good song, simple but heartfelt, and I knew it had a melody that you could sing it little or you could sing it big. It's the kind of song you can sing emotional. When I recorded that particular song, I had it, it was just a real heartfelt song for me. But then when Whitney Houston did it, she was able to take that same melody and then take it so many places that my voice wouldn't even go there, or I wouldn't even think to do it. So when you write a song like Jolene, if you enjoy them, but then you'll write a song like Coat of Many Colors, which is my personal favorite. In my coat of many colors, Mama made for me. But you don't know if other people will relate to that or not because it's so personal. They did, of course, because of me, but you never know how other people are going to take to the song. You just know in your heart if you personally like it, or you think, I think people... you kind of go by, like a Jolene, for instance. That's such a singable song. Every garage band in the world, it's been recorded more than anything I've ever written, believe it or not, more than any song, even 9 to 5. Jolene has been recorded. Jolene, 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 please don't take him just because you can. Because it just says the same thing over and over. Jolene, 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 Jolene. How hard can that be? So you just hope for the best when you're writing. And sometimes, like you said, you just know when you've hit on one, and you hope it sticks.
Well, Paula Cole, that's like just a mini masterclass right there from Dolly Parton about songwriting. But what is it about her lyrics that they do stay with us? I mean, they seem so simple, but they're such powerful ideas.
Oh, and even ideas that challenge the system, like that she wrote feminist songs, without people really even understanding, like Just Because I'm a Woman in 1968. I urge you guys who are listening to just listen to that, Just Because I'm a Woman. And The Bargain Store in 1975 was banned by country radio. And I wouldn't be surprised if it encouraged her to think beyond country, just running into those walls. Or being on television with Porter Wagner. I know she wanted to break free from that. And she thought like a businesswoman. And she went into pop culture where she could reach more people and do better business and be freer. So like those songs, that speaks to like feminism in me. And telling the little told stories of the woman's point of view in a popular song was radical. So radical that they banned her from radio, and on and on and on. She writes simple universal truths sung by an angel. She is an angel. Her husband Carl used to call her an angel and knew she was an angel. I think she was an earth angel amongst. And someone like, say, a writer like Bossa Nova King Antonio Carlos Jobim, who is another, like, I revere his writing. He wrote 200 songs in his lifetime. Dolly Parton wrote over 2,000 songs in her lifetime. She slept very rarely. She slept maybe 3 or 4 hours a night, and she'd wake up and do her spiritual practice and write. She was just a font. She was connected to the divine and the mystery for all of our benefit.
Well, you just raised something that I had been wondering about, because we think of these really strong female singers in country music, like Loretta Lynn and Patsy Cline and June Carter Cash, and coming from the Cash family and onward through Reba McEntire and, of course, ultimately Taylor Swift. And it made me wonder if that gave Dolly Parton more opportunity, but I'm hearing from you that it may have been even harder for her than coming up through a different genre.
Well, I think she paved the way for most of those people that you mentioned. Yeah, most of them. She was, there's something about her. She doesn't press buttons. She doesn't isolate people. She doesn't get angry. That's some kind of superpower. Yeah. I'm still speaking in present tense because she's still very alive to me. I can't quite accept it that she's gone. It feels like a loss of a mother or something. So I will cry after this interview. Yeah. But for now, I'm speaking in present tense, and she doesn't isolate people. Even if she presses buttons, you still come away feeling loved.
Mm-hmm. I'm speaking with Paula Cole, the Grammy-winning singer-songwriter. Her album, Sonic Memoir, Demos, 1989 to 1998, will come out September 10th. You can also see her at the Wilbur Theater on September 18th, performing from her seminal album, This Fire, actually performing the album in full for its 30th anniversary. I want to go back to, again, our conversation. And by the way, I have to say, I'm echoing what you said. She was just the loveliest person. I was so fortunate. I had the only sit-down interview with her that day that she came to Boston, and she was the most extraordinary person. She was so fun and so kind. She just wanted to stay and talk, even though her people were trying to move her along, and I so appreciated her in that regard. But you just gave a couple of recommendations, which is so exciting for people to explore a Dolly they might not know. I had also asked her about the way she felt about the public reaction to her work, where she also named some of her favorite deeper cuts from her very vast catalog that fans might not be as familiar with. Do you take it personal? Do you care what people think when you put the music out?
Well, yeah, I care. You always care. You hope everything you write's a hit. You know how you always love all your kids, and some of them are prettier than others, and some of them do better than others. But they're all personal to you. All my songs are personal. But I'm not offended if they're not all hits. I'm always curious to see what's going to hit. Some of my very favorite songs have never been the biggest hits. They've been album cuts, songs like Down from Dover.
I know this dress I'm wearing doesn't hide the secret I have tried concealing.
Gypsy Joe and Me, songs that people have never even heard.
We never did allow no roots to grow beneath our feet.
And so it's really, to me, it depends on how I feel about it. They're all hits with me because they're mine. They're my kids. I always say my songs are my kids, and I expect them to support me when I'm old. And some of them have.
I think they have.
Yeah.
So as we hear about the songs that you mentioned, and then Down from Dover and Gypsy Joe and Me, these cuts that people don't even know about, and to also realize that still people are learning, I think this morning and yesterday, that she wrote I Will Always Love You, that she had a disco track in the 1970s. How do you look at the way she spanned popular music?
I think she was just herself. It didn't matter the genre or the setting. It didn't matter if it was a Broadway play or 9 to 5. It didn't matter even if she like Here You Come Again is a cover, and she knew a good song, and she knew that would help her cross the bridge into popular music, and it did. And it didn't matter. She was authentic to herself, even if she changed like her outfits and her genre. She even said, like, I get asked to do movies, but they want me sometimes to change the way I look. But I want to be me. She wants to put on her nails and her hair and her fancy outfits, and she wants to be herself. So she would only take the movie jobs that let her be herself. And that really was true. She was true to herself that way. That album, Here You Come Again, it represented her really crossing into pop. And I love that album too. In fact, that was my discovery of Dolly when I was a girl. And there, she goes out there sometimes. Like this, there's a song on there called Me and Little Andy, and it's about a little girl and the little dog that she has, Andy, and they're homeless. I mean, she would break your heart with her lyrics. And she even impersonates a little girl's voice, and it's kind of, it's going out on a limb, let me tell you. Like, a lot of people wouldn't dare to do that, but it's so heart-wrenching. She just goes in there and goes for the jugular and takes your heart out. You can't not feel or feel empathy for people less fortunate, or maybe the poverty she's experienced, or a woman's point of view. She had that ability to tug your heartstring.
Well, and finally, and you and I just talked about this on the show recently, what it is to be in this industry and the pressures that come to bear and the expectations of you, not to mention the conversations about you. But we saw, as you said, Dolly Parton always composed herself. You never saw her lash out. You never saw anger. And remarkably, you also saw her control her situation. If people were going to comment on her looks or her costumes or anything of that nature, she always owned it before somebody else did. How did she manifest that?
I know. Don't we all wish we knew that? And then we would do it ourselves. I wish I knew that. I think there's like a true light and goodness in her, and she didn't want to isolate or hurt people. I think she knew a lot of adversity in her childhood, and it didn't make her bitter. It made her rise above. She had deep belief and faith. So, and prayer and her spiritual practice was a daily important part of her life. And I think that kept a light alive in her soul. Real kindness and humility.
Yeah. Well, Paula Cole, you and I are going to have a big hug the next time we see each other, because we're in the exact same place, I think, today. Thank you so much for this conversation, and I look forward to chatting with you again next time on a happier occasion, but we appreciate your taking the time this afternoon.
Oh, I'm so happy you got a chance to sit down with Dolly and know her a little. She's really an angel, and I just wish her family all good things.
As do I.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Paula Cole is a Grammy-winning singer-songwriter. Her album Sonic Memoir, Demos, 1989 to 1998, dropped September 10th, and she'll be at the Wilbur Theater on September 18th performing her seminal album, This Fire, in full for its 30th anniversary. Again, thank you. And before we leave this segment, here's Dolly Parton once more as she reflected on her enduring popularity in our conversation. You're having a moment right now. There's the podcast, there's the Dollyverse that everybody talks about. I think you're giving Oprah a run for her money because people talk about you as an angel, a saint. I heard you say Dolly Mama. That's what your family calls you?
Yeah, my friends call me the Dolly Mama, and my brothers and sisters, a lot of them just kid me about that. But I've been around a long time. I think people relate to me. I feel like a member of their family, like Aunt Dolly, or like an older sister, because people kind of grown up with me, and their kids have grown up with me. I've been around a long time doing a lot of different things. I've been in the movies, been on television, even been in little shows like Hannah Montana. So I have a younger following too, and I work a lot with children through the Imagination Library. So I just love people. I accept everybody for who and how they are, wherever they are.
Do you feel it's different? It's more than just being around, I think. Though lots of people have been around for a long time.
Well, I try to put something good in the world. I try to let my little light shine. I try to find the God light in everybody else and try to connect myself to that, because I just think there's goodness in everybody, and I try to play to that. And I try to, every day, I ask God to let me shine and radiate with His light and let me be a blessing to the world and glorify Him somehow. And that's how I go about my day and have fun doing it. Yeah.
It's Paula just described her too. What an extraordinary day that was. You can find the full conversation on the GBH News YouTube channel, and you can find the link on my Instagram page as well as the Culture Shows. Coming up, a Polish resistance fighter found himself locked in a cell with the Nazi officer he had once helped target for assassination. Translator Sean Gasper-By joins us with a remarkable story of what happened next. He's next on the Culture Show. Stay with us.
The The Culture Show is made possible in part by a generous contribution from the Fiducia Fund, proud to support this station's arts and culture programming.
I'm Arun Rolfe. Today on GBH's All Things Considered, a state lawmaker from Methuen has been arrested on fraud charges after allegedly misusing federal COVID funds. And ICE has arrested more than 7,000 immigrants in Massachusetts, and many families are struggling with the mental health impacts with little support available. Those stories and all the day's news starting at 4 on GBH 89.7.
Funding for our programs comes from you.
And the Art Complex Museum in Duxbury, presenting Thursday nights at the museum from 5 to 8 each Thursday through September 10th, with Duxbury Oysters, live music, and artist talks, open to the public. More at artcomplex.org. And Neville Place Assisted Living in Cambridge, providing residents with a range of services designed to help seniors stay sharp, social, and independent. More at nevilleplace.org/care. And Cambridge Savings Bank. CSB is committed to improving the financial well-being of local small businesses through financial education and banking services. Learn more at cambridgesavings.com. Member FDIC.
Listen to GBH 89.7. Read GBH Daily. Watch the Boston Public Radio live stream. However you get your news, find it on the GBH News app. Download it today on the App Store or Google Play.
I'm Jared Bowen. This is The Culture Show, streaming on the GBH News YouTube channel and broadcasting live on 89.7 from our studio at the Boston Public Library. What does a mass murderer tell himself about the life he has led, and what might you learn if you had 255 days to ask him? In 1949, Polish resistance fighter and journalist Kazimierz Mocharski was placed in a Warsaw prison cell alongside Jürgen Stroop, the Nazi SS general who oversaw the destruction of the Warsaw Ghetto and the murder or capture of more than 56,000 Jews. During World War II, Mocharski was a leader in Poland's underground home army, where he was involved in resistance efforts to assassinate Stroop. Then he literally found himself sleeping with the enemy in a cell. So Mocharski began asking questions, not simply about what Stroop had done, but about how he was capable of doing it. He listened as Stroop discussed his upbringing, his ambitions to rise through the Nazi ranks, and then the beliefs that shaped his sense of duty. It was Mocharski's attempt to understand how a man could come to justify mass murder. He survived the prison, and after his release, he reconstructed their conversations from memory and corroborated Stroop's accounts against historical records. The result was Conversations with an Executioner, part prison memoir, part investigation, and part psychological study of one of Nazi Germany's most notorious criminals. Now, half a century after its original publication, the complete book is available in English for the first time. Translated by Sean Gasper Bai, an award-winning translator of Polish literature. He'll appear at Just Bookish in Dorchester next Tuesday. He joins us to talk about it all. Sean Gasper Bai, welcome to the Culture Show. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, this is a work that's been in existence for half a century. How is it that it's only coming to fruition with the English translation, thanks to you right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is a book that really struggled to get into publication at every stage of its life. It was subject to censorship under communism and was not able to be published during the author's lifetime. There's an abridged English translation from the 80s that emerged under circumstances that aren't clear to me. The author's daughter, who I've been in touch with, says that at the time Poland was under martial law and she was not in touch with anyone who told her that it was happening. It just sort of appeared out of nowhere. I think it's a challenging book. There are a lot of practical issues with bringing it into translation. I think there also has been historically less interest in these voices from Eastern Europe talking about their experiences of the Second World War. I think in the US we tend to be more focused on our own. That's something that's changed in recent years. And I think also it's just, this is a hugely well-known book in Poland. It's canonical, and I think at a certain point its reputation was finally such that people kept asking, why doesn't this book exist? Why doesn't this book exist in English? And the reason it does is because of my editor, Claire Bullock, who made it a passion project of hers for several years.
Well, as you dove into this project, what did you begin to understand about the motivations in this conversation and what Moczarski was trying to draw out and really trying to understand about this man feet away?
So Moczarski was a journalist by training, and I think that when he found himself in this situation, those journalistic instincts just kicked in. He also knew that the destruction that Jürgen Stroop had overseen in the Warsaw Ghetto was total. And there was actually very little evidence remaining of what had happened in the ghetto in 1943 during the Ghetto Uprising, which Stroop suppressed. And so I think he immediately understood that there was real value to be had here in getting whatever kind of documentation he possibly could. He had nothing to write with, and so he committed as much as he possibly could to memory and spent years, he talked about, writing the book in his head while he remained in prison. So I think he understood the value of this story, the historical value of this story right away. I think he
Let
also...
me stop you there, because that's a major point. That, again, he was not recording these conversations. He didn't write this from transcripts, but that he memorized them. But this is also, as we know, something that's not completely unusual in circumstances like this, when you have people in prison trying to commit things to memory. I know it's also complicated, the book's publication, because people wonder, is it fact, is it not?
That's right.
But how was he able to do this?
He talked about being able to enter a state of superhuman concentration. He said that being in prison, there was so little outside stimulus that he could live entirely in his head and recreate these scenes in extraordinary detail. He talked about being able to visualize the manuscript in his head, mark it up, turn to several pages on, and then come back to the markups that he had done before. There's been a lot of skepticism about this over the years, but there are eyewitnesses, people who knew Moczarski during his lifetime, who testified that, yes, he did have this extraordinary memory. And there are instances of this. Other people who spent long times in prison, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, wrote an extraordinarily long epic poem in his head while he was in the Gulag. So it is extraordinary. And Moczarski, when he was released from prison, made a point of verifying absolutely everything he could. He went into the archives. He contacted friends in the U.S. to go into the Pentagon archives. So he really did everything he could to make sure this was as accurate as possible.
So the major question is how Stroop conducted himself, knowing that he had a death sentence.
That's right.
So he was facing death. So whatever he said, he knew they were going to be among his last months of words and recounting. Who was he in this moment? Was he a man with any bit of remorse?
No, absolutely not. Stroop is interesting because he was an extremely committed Nazi, but also a very shallow man. He was someone who was ambitious and unscrupulous and saw the Nazi movement as a wagon that he could hitch himself to. And part of that mentality was that he did not reflect very deeply about the morality or immorality of what he was doing. And there are these moments where Moczarski tries to really corner him and confront him with the reality of what he did. And it's those moments where Stroop turns from this this pompous, arrogant, very full of himself character he sort of curls up into himself. He becomes meek, he becomes shy, because he can't actually face the reality of what he did, because he's never really thought about it in that level of depth before. There are extraordinary moments, the swings in his character that we see as they were locked in this small cell together.
Something I was struck by, and I don't know what it necessarily means, but where his origin, where his upbringing comes in his rise through the Nazi Party and then conducting these horrific executions and destruction.
Yeah, he grew up in a small town, basically, and had a middle school education and a major chip on his shoulder about the German elite. And he wanted to be in that elite, and he wanted to be respected, and however he got there was of no consequence. And something Moczarski highlights again and again is how militarized German culture was in the run-up to the war, the cult of the military uniform, the cult of social hierarchy. That was what Stroop really bought into. That was the esteem that he was looking after. And so when he was looking for prestige, it was only through physical force and through domination of other people. That was really his ideology.
I am speaking with Sean Gasper-Bai, who is the translator of Conversations with an Executioner by Kazimierz Moczarski, now translated to English for the first time. He'll appear at Just Bookish in Dorchester next Tuesday. If people are listening along closely, they're thinking, wait, why is this journalist in prison in the same cell alongside a mass murderer? Why was Moczarski imprisoned?
That's an excellent question, and it's at the heart of why this book had such a difficult journey to publication. Moczarski was a member of the Home Army, the main Polish resistance force during the war. When Poland was liberated by the Soviet Union, liberated in quotation marks, the Soviets viewed the existing resistance as a competitive force, as somebody who was going to get in the way of their dominance of Poland. And so they invented this lie that the Home Army had not fought the Nazis, that it had collaborated with them instead. And Moczarski was part of a roundup of senior figures in the Home Army who were falsely accused of collaboration and who were imprisoned and in some cases executed. Moczarski spent 11 years in prison after the war. He was tortured, he said, in 49 different ways. And putting him into the cell with Stroop was a form of psychological torture. It was meant to literally equate him with the very Nazi war criminals that he had spent the war fighting.
There was a third person in that cell. How did that create an environment or a dynamic for him to have these conversations?
Yeah, there was a man named Gustav Schielke who was a sort of mid-ranking official in the German occupation government in Poland. Schielke is interesting because he's sort of a German everyman. He didn't really buy into Nazi ideology, and he thought that Hitler was sort of full of himself, but obviously sort of rode along with the movement. And there's these sort of alliances that form kind of between and among them in the cell. They were forced to live in sort of support and honesty with one another because it was such a hostile environment in this prison. They were all being tortured. They couldn't rely on the guards or anything like that. But at the same time, they were these sort of sworn enemies. And so you can see them all sort of calculating and maneuvering around one another in the course of the book. It's very dramatic, actually. It's very literary, even though it's something that happened in real life.
And cinematic, and the stuff of plays, which it has been.
Yes.
Moczarski, as I mentioned in the introduction, was also part of a plot to assassinate Stroop.
That's
and
right.
had been successful in the murder of other leaders within his Nazi hierarchy.
That's right.
To what extent did he use that and introduce that to Stroop?
It's interesting. So Moczarski worked mainly for intelligence in the resistance, and towards the end of the war was in charge of targeting collaborators and senior Nazi officials who would eventually be assassinated. He did try to assassinate Stroop, and he gives an account of that in the book. But Stroop really has to back him into a corner about it. Moczarski really doesn't want to share what he was up to in the resistance. He thinks there's no point in telling the Nazis about this. It can't do him any good. But he does tell this extraordinary story of trying to target Stroop when he was in the park doing riding practice and working with the Polish gardeners in the park to try to figure out when they could send somebody in there with a gun. It didn't work, but you can imagine what it must be like finding yourself face to face with someone who you had tried to kill. They spent 8 months about in the cell together, 8 or 9 months.
What was it for you to spend time in this cell? I kept thinking about this as I'm going deeper into the story. It's worth us, of course, to understand this history, but it's hard to try to get into the mind of a mass murderer. You had to literally translate the stories, his words, his sentiments.
That's right, yeah. I mean, the first thing to say is it was nothing like Moczarski's experience of being trapped in the cell with him. I worked on this book for 2 years. I did have to get into their minds because I needed to understand how they would sound in English, how they would speak, how they would express themselves. This is not just an important historical book, it's an important work of literature, and to succeed for my readers, it needed to be evocative. It needed to create a vivid sort of inner experience of reading. The characters had to be three-dimensional. They had to be believable. They had to sound like real people. So I had to think about where did they come from? What was their education? How would they express themselves? What type of vocabulary would they use? Much more than just sort of, transferring one word in Polish into one word in English. I acted the scenes out loud until I could find a voice for each of them that would work. Moczarski's narration is also extraordinary. He's a very talented writer with a really unusual style that I wanted to capture. And I worked very closely with my editor, refining it stylistically, making sure that it really came to life. Yeah.
Well, past his prologue, unfortunately, especially in this case, this is not a world today absent of mass murder and genocide. No. What is the value of having this English translation come out in this moment?
I think that it's in part that the Holocaust is now moving out of living memory as we lose the last generation of survivors. And so at this moment, I think it's more important than ever to turn back to the eyewitnesses and to the primary sources. But as you say, we live in a world where war crimes, where mass murder, where genocide are still very real. And I hope that this book will contribute to people understanding how it can be that these things that we all acknowledge are evil can nevertheless come about, and how people like Stroop can contribute to them.
I'll endeavor to leave on a higher note for this conversation. As you spent this much time, especially knowing how you got into Moczarski's head now, how did he manifest the strength to get through this? Does he give insight into, again, literally sleeping alongside the enemy? It's just all so incomprehensible.
You know, Moczarski was a man of just incredible personal integrity. When he was finally released from prison, he actually went to court to have his false convictions overturned, which was an incredibly foolhardy thing to do in communist Poland. And he was so admirably honest that he actually succeeded. The conviction was overturned. This man is a hero in Poland. This is a canonical book. I'm actually very pleased we're partnering on the event with the Polish American Heritage and Community Foundation, which is an illustration just of how important this book is to Polish Americans as well. The thing that will stay with me from this book, I think, is Moczarski's character, him as an inspiration for how we could all seek to live under such incredibly trying circumstances.
Well, congratulations on your 2 years of work about bringing this to English culture, finally, after a half century. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.
Sean Gasperby is the translator of Conversations with an Executioner by Kazimierz Moczarski, now translated to English for the first time. Sean will appear at Just Bookish in Dorchester next Tuesday. Again, thank you. Coming up, A Proper Fit traces the course of the corset. Worcester was once a capital of the booming bodice industry, producing a garment that constricted women physically, even as the industry behind it helped liberate them in the workplace. That's next on The Culture Show. Stay with us.
The world takes you outside your borders.
Johannesburg,
Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan,
Kyiv, Chiba, Japan. Because what happens there?
When it comes to EVs, Chinese cars eat everyone's lunch.
Affects what happens at home.
The fact that the sides are talking again, that's a positive step.
I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. Listen each weekday to The World.
This afternoon at 3 on GBH 89.7.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you.
And Standish Village in Dorchester's Lower Mills, providing assisted living residents with programs designed to help seniors stay sharp, social, and independent. Learn more at standishvillage.com/programs. And GM Roth Design Remodeling, providing custom kitchens, bathrooms, and accessory dwelling units. Their design team works to create living-in-place solutions tailored to the needs of each home and family. More information at gmroth.com. And M. Steinert & Sons Pianos, the region's authorized Steinway dealer, presents the return of the Symphony Hall Piano Event, Friday, September 11th through Sunday the 13th at Symphony Hall. msteinert.com.
From your neighborhood to your newsfeed, GBH News is your trusted source for the news that matters to you. Find us wherever you are at GBH News and always at GBH 89.7. GBH News, what matters to you.
I'm Jared Bowen. This is The Culture Show, live on 89.7 from our studio at the Boston Public Library and streaming on the GBH News YouTube channel. The corset has always been good at holding contradictions together. For centuries, its cinched waists, sculpted bodies, and quite literally restricted women's movement. And yet, here in Worcester, the business of making corsets gave generations of women something their clothes did not, room to maneuver. From the Civil War through much of the 20th century, Worcester was a corset capital, home to more than 120 businesses devoted to making, fitting, and selling them. Thousands of women earn their living around as stitchers and saleswomen, independent corsetiers, and inventors and factory owners, much of the work unfolding before American women won the constitutional right to vote. And now from Bridgerton to Beyonce, the corset still hasn't loosened its grip on us. Anne-Marie Murphy traces the remarkably durable garment and the women whose livelihoods depended on it in her new book, A Proper Fit, Women at Work in a City of Corsets. Anne-Marie, welcome to The Culture Show. Great to have you here.
Great to be here.
This is a history I certainly didn't know anything about. I think it'll be a surprise to many, and I know it piqued your interest when you moved to Worcester. What did you begin to discover?
Well, I moved to Worcester about 9 years ago, and I knew a bit about Worcester. I knew it was like a heavy industrial town. Big factories, sort of post-industrial, empty factories. And I thought of the factories producing the things that I knew it produced, like durable goods, horseshoes, envelopes, wire, cable, heavy stuff. And then when I got here, within a year or two, I started hearing about this big corset industry that was in the city. And mainly I heard about the Royal Worcester Corset Company, which was the huge employer for many years. And then I started, as I was, encouraging my curiosity, I started hearing about this woman who had run a factory herself. Around the year 1900, I thought, how is that even possible? So that curiosity led me to spend a lot of time during the pandemic, when my work quieted down, as many of ours did, to start digging. So I took the year 1900, when I knew she had been in town working, and I worked backwards to see when the company had started. So as I'm going backwards through the city directories, I'm finding each year more and more listings in this corset manufacturing section in the back of the city directories, and every few weeks I'd find a few dozen more, until finally I thought, well, it's not just this woman, there's like an entire, it's almost like Pompeii, there's this buried civilization that nobody knew about. Hundreds of women making a living in the city linked to this one object.
Well, let's talk about, before we get to the women who are making the corsets, the women who led these businesses. As you said, how is this possible? This is before women had the right to vote. So how was it possible?
Well, the primary focus of this book is a woman named Mary Bown, and I discovered after the digging started why not much had been written about her. That was her third name. She was first Mary Heinzelman. She had a first marriage. She had a second marriage. Her first corset factory opened under the name Corset H in 1905 and changed its name to Ivy Corset, which is the one that people connected with her in 1917. So there were essentially two businesses and three women to research. She came to the city around 1900. At that point, she had been in New York City as a internationally known designer for corsets. She worked her way up to that position from a small city in Ohio, Springfield, the place where they were eating the dogs and the cats. Yeah. And before that, she was in a tiny little town called London, Ohio. So she worked her way up. She started as a self-employed person. She enhanced her craft. She moved to a bigger city. She moved to the biggest possible city. And there she was discovered by David Hill Fanning, who is the head of the Royal Worcester Company. And he lured her up to Worcester. So that was her path to this position. Within a year or two of her coming to Worcester and working at Royal Worcester Corset, she decided to go out on her own. So that was her path. And other women had different paths because of the huge Royal Worcester factory since the 1860s. Many people got experience in his factory and then other factories and went off on their own.
I'm speaking with Anne-Marie Murphy, the author of A Proper Fit, Women at Work in a City of Corsets, the new book. So before we continue with how this was all happening and who was making them, what was the role of the corset? How did it fit into daily life in all sectors of society?
Okay, so Jared, if you were a woman in 1880, 1900, even 1910, you wore a corset.
That's what you did, like any other piece
at the
of article of
farm,
clothing.
milking a cow, working in the factory, at the opera, every woman wore a corset every day. So if you were to make this for a living, you would have some job security, right?
Yeah, exactly. Pretty shrewd.
Yeah, so the corset was omnipresent. When women got the vote in the year 1920, that began a decade that was known in the industry as the corsetless 20s. So women got the vote. started wanting this kind of figure, cut their hair.
You're going straight down like a flapper dress.
No more of this.
No more hourglass
of this.
For our radio listeners,
A tennis star. And, they got the vote. They had been through World War I. Many of them served during World War I. They came back, they were done with the corset. They were done. And then the corset later, it had waves. It had waves. There were waist cinching corsets. And now we're in another wave of super high fashion corsets, like red carpet gala corsets. And the role of the corset has changed. Back in the day, you would never have worn your corset outside your clothes to show it off. Unheard of. You would be put in jail.
And then came Madonna and others.
Yes, I thought of her exactly. Here's a modern woman who's super proud of her fabulously sculpted dancer's body, and she's wearing a corset to show it off and to show the world. This is what I look like. I've paid someone thousands of dollars to make this couture corset for me. Things have changed radically.
Speaking of paying money for corsets, I understand that you had your own corset made, which allowed you to have an understanding and then share with us about exactly what they do and how they're made and the work that goes into them.
Yes, so at one of my book talks, someone got word to me that she couldn't make it that night, but she really wanted to talk to me. And this woman turned out to be a local corsetier, a woman who makes corsets as one of her means of income. She lives out in the Berkshires. Her name is Jackie Lucchese. And we corresponded, and we met, and she came to some of my events. And at one point I said to her, I really think I need to have a corset to write this book properly. I mean, I want to see what the process is. I'm talking about these women who are making them all day. I want to see what they went through. So I personally didn't make the corset, but I helped Jackie by sitting through all 3 fittings for it. The first fitting, there are, not 3 measurements, but maybe closer to 40. Here to here, here to here, here to here. Unbelievable, like geometry project, tailoring, almost like sculpting. And the first corset she makes for you is made out of some, throwaway plain cotton. It's a template. And then she calls you back. You're getting fitted again. More pins. This has to be longer. I've got to let this out a little bit. This needs to come to more of a point. And then she goes to work with the real fabric. And it was amazing to watch the amount of work involved. So that process and this book gave me such an appreciation for the amount of work that goes into making this garment.
Have you worn the corset?
I have. I've worn it a few times.
And what's the experience?
Oh, you feel regal. You feel so poised, so well sculpted. You feel regal, I think is the word. It's a very nice feeling. And I'm not saying I'd want to wear it all day, in the factory, on the factory floor, but I can see where going to a formal, fancy event, it would give you a feeling of as if you were a queen. And there's actually a section in the book about men, did men wear corsets? And there was actually a market for men to buy corsets, especially after World War I. The Germans had really encouraged their soldiers to wear a certain style of corset, a shorter one. And that spread around, and there was sort of a militaristic feeling about it, sculpture, structure. You're standing tall.
Well, I don't want to completely leave the impression that there is this wonderful contradiction that works, that women are making restrictive garments that enable them to have greater liberties, because you point out in the book that, although, yes, that was true in many circumstances, conditions in these factories weren't great.
True. That improved over the years. In the late 1800s, it was a pretty difficult job. I came upon a letter at the Schlesinger Library of a young woman, Jenny Malatsky, 14 years old, who climbed up the stairs to the, I forget the name of the Women's Trade Union League in New York City, to ask for help to unionize the factory floor, because she said in her letter, we get in the morning and the foreman writes the piece rate on the chalkboard, and as the hours pass, he continues to drop the rate. So, by 11 o'clock, you're making $1 less per hour. By 2, so the rate is dropping. And then I found another great letter from a woman in England who talked about all of the deductions that came out of their paychecks. They paid for the lights. They paid for the thread that they used. They were dinged for each grease splatter that the machine dropped onto the corset. So you weren't entirely sure after a hard day's work how much money you were actually going to get paid. So that, over time, improved.
I was also interested to read that in addition to the 20s happening and our freedom and people are bursting out of their corsets, there was also a medical community that stepped forward at one point expressing health concerns over the corset. What kind of backlash did that create? How damaging was it?
Yes, so dress reform, it's sort of the overall term for women, late 1800s, early 1900s, who don't like the way they're being told to dress. And a corset, obviously, if it's tightly laced, you're going to hurt things. It's going to be hard to breathe. It's going to be hard to bend over and pick things up. And what kind of a way is that to go through the day, really? So there was a lot of pushback. A lot of the people fighting for the right to vote were also dress reformers. Said, look, we're done with all of this oppression. Who's telling us to wear this corset? You all are. We don't really want to wear them anymore. We want our vote. We want to get rid of these corsets. We want to be able to play tennis and go serve in the war and become veterans. And so, there were medical complaints, and mostly because of comfort. And there have been a lot of sort of urban legends about damage that corsets have done to women's bodies over the years. But Valerie Steele, who's one of the premier historians of the corset, she found no evidence of any of that being true. But I'm sure that the squeeze factor was the main concern.
Now, how would you describe what this ultimately created for women who were given these opportunities or created these opportunities for themselves, more notably, to take charge, have jobs, have leadership positions, found businesses, and carry that through as long as they could? Well,
Massively empowering to be able to pay your bills. There's a woman in this book by the name of Helen Haley who had, I think, in a 30-year time period, 12 different addresses. These are people who are scraping together a living, widows, divorcees, living in rooming houses, upstairs, trying to piece a living together. If you can contact a corset manufacturer, get by mail their book of how to become a corsetier, study it, get your certificate, hang out a shingle, you can be in business. As I mentioned before, during many decades, 1800s, 1900s, it was required wearing. So, you would have people coming back to you every year. You would come back to Edith Salkstrom and say, Edith, I'm back for my fitting. It's December. I've gained some weight. I broke a few hips, I broke a few ribs, had 2 babies. So we need to redo the measurements. So you'd have repeat customers, like a dentist would, like a tailor. And that woman that I just mentioned, Edith Salkstrom, she was one of 2 women I discovered in the book who made enough money as a self-employed corset maker to buy her own house. She bought hers in 1940. The other woman who achieved that amazing goal in 1910 was Emma Kemp. I mean, she was 10 years away from having a vote. I don't even know who signed the papers for her.
It's an extraordinary history, and as you document here with amazing photographs and illustrations and historical materials too, people can still find the history of corsets in Worcester hiding in plain sight on buildings. Anne-Marie Murphy, thank you so much for being here, and congratulations on the book. You make me want to try a corset.
You should. My pleasure.
All right. Anne-Marie Murphy is the author of A Proper Fit, Women at Work in a City of Corsets. Thank you for listening to another edition of The Culture Show. A reminder that our next Wednesday watch party is September 2nd. We'll revisit Spike Lee's 1989 Scorcher, Do the Right Thing. And tune in tomorrow when Christopher Rothko joins us to talk about donating one of his father, Mark Rothko's early Gloucester paintings to the Cape Ann Museum, and why he wanted that work to come home. Today's engineer is Bill Piacitelli, along with Dave Goodman, the BPL technical and logistics crew, Maddie Geyer, Patrick Lally, Bill Francis, Sandra Lopez-Burke, Juan Jose Cadena, and Chris Hanks. Thank you to our security team, Darius and Derek, to the Lennox Hotel, and to the Newsfeed Cafe. Thank you for everyone who came down here to be with us at the library today. We always love seeing you. If you ever miss us here on the radio, you can keep up with all things arts and culture by way of our podcast. I'm Jared Bowen. Have a great day.
The Culture Show is made possible in part by a generous contribution from the Fiducia Fund, proud to support this station's arts and culture programming.